On today's episode of Locked On 76ers, Keith and I dive into a possible draft pick. Not a high draft pick, but a draft pick nonetheless for the 76ers. The Brooklyn Nets, the 76ers, deferring picks. We'll get to it next right here, Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On 76ers. And today, our program with you here today is brought to you by Rock Auto, an amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Thank you again. Welcome. You are Locked On 76ers. I am Devon Givens with you here alongside my co-host and partner, Keith Pompey, here on the Locked On 76ers. Really appreciate you guys joining us. Keith, what's going on, man?
What's popping? How are you?
Oh, man, the heat is popping here in Philadelphia. That's what's popping. It's like the Miami Heat. It's Philadelphia Heat right now as we get into the month of June. But we got to thank everybody first for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On 76ers is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, right here at Locked On 76ers. Keith, man, although we were so used to the draft lottery where you were in Chicago and the lottery took place, the number one pick now goes to the Orlando Magic. Orlando got it, right? Yeah, Orlando Magic. Mm-hmm. We were so used to it from the rebuild era of paying so much attention to the lottery, all the top players in the draft. And even in the years that they started to improve back in 2017-18 and making the postseason, that with this 5-year run, the Sixers still had high draft picks, the highest being in 2018 with the number 10 overall selection. Since then, they've had some selections in the 20s, making good on those with Matisse Thybulle and Tyrese Maxey in the 20s. Jaden Springer, to be determined from last year at pick number 28. This year, Keith, they do not technically have a pick because in the James Harden, Ben Simmons deal, they shipped that pick to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, can you explain, though, what tomorrow, June 1st, why it's important for the 76ers, one way or the other, with the draft pick that they did send to Brooklyn?
Yes, tomorrow's an important date because the Brooklyn Nets have until June the 1st, which is tomorrow, to decide if they want to defer that draft pick or not. So basically, right now, if the way it looks, if Brooklyn says, hey, we want the pick, the 76ers would not have a draft pick at all in this draft. Not at all, right? None. If the Brooklyn Nets say we want to defer it until next year, then the 76ers will select 23rd. Now, again, when I say not at all, I'm talking about right now because things tend to happen on draft night where the Sixers could possibly buy a second round pick from someone. So there are going to be some options. But as of right now, if Brooklyn Nets defer that pick, the Sixers pick 23rd. If they don't defer that pick, the Sixers won't have a draft pick at all.
Well, and looking at where they are right now, as you explain it, and you're not allowed to trade back-to-back years with the picks. So this one will be important because of where the roster construction goes with the 76ers and all the things that we talked about as soon as the season ended, Keith, of what this team could potentially need. And once again, a young player coming in the 20s could really help out the 76ers with their overall depth. Now, you look at Jaden Springer, as we talked about already at pick number 28, and Keith, young player, 19 years of age, coming out of University of Tennessee, spent a lot of time in Delaware with the Blue Coats, saw some action in the postseason in the games that were more lopsided. The reserves came in to finish out the game. And Doc Rivers did say, Keith, at the end of the season when it sat down, Jaden Springer, came out early, and then Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers later on, where they talked about how he could potentially be a defender right away on the wing at that 6'4" frame, big body, can body up against those offensive players. And his development, before we get to the pros and the cons, and we'll get to that throughout the episode here, his development is really important, and that goes along potentially if they do get this pick or not get a pick. So Jaden Springer, your thoughts on how important it is for him to take that next step next season in the event that they have to call his number a little bit more?
I think it's very important for him. I mean, let's keep it real. Like, he was a young guy. Like, I believe he was the second youngest guy in the NBA draft, right? The second youngest one. So, you look at it, everything for him was long-term. You can say like they used the G League for him as like another year of college, right? To whereas he basically, would go to the Sixers games and then on the bench and he would learn. But for the most part, he was learning via by playing on the G League team. And I feel like, they can look at this year with him as a rookie season, a la kind of like what they did with Nerlens Noel, Joel Embiid, other guys. The only difference is he's actually playing against competition where those guys sat out. And when we look at it, some of his strengths that he have in regards to being a quality defender, those are certain things that the Sixers need. They need perimeter defensive toughness. And that's a quality that he has, right? So I feel like, him is just like if they don't get a draft pick or whatever, he could be a guy that like basically steps in and becomes that guy, that rookie for him.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know what, Keith, on that one, let's get into the pros on the other side of what it could mean for the Sixers if they get the pick or not get the pick. We'll get to that next right here, Locked On 76ers.
Right now, I want to talk to you guys about Prize Picks, right? All right, NBA fans, are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning app, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a daily fantasy made easy. I love this, and we know you will too. Here it is, y'all. It's easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you and the projected number. I mean, that's simple, right? Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and it's that easy. Prize Pick is safe, and it offers fast withdrawals. You ain't got to wait to get that money. That's always important, right? So for a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point. I'm telling y'all, do it today, people. Definitely make sure that you do it today.
Do it today, folks. You know you want to spend some of that summer money. Get some extra bucks there by going there and checking out what Keith just talked about. Thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast for nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And as that now stands with 2 teams remaining, you might want to make sure you check in on the Locked On Now podcast with these 2 teams left, Boston and Golden State. We'll preview, we'll give our thoughts on the finals maybe tomorrow as the game gets underway on Thursday for game number 1 in San Francisco. But Keith, let's get into the pros of the Sixers getting this pick. Let's say that for pick number 23 in this draft. As I said, they've hit pretty well, honestly, with Matisse Thybulle and Tyrese Maxey. And while Thybulle was taking a step back a little bit because of his lack of offensive production and how his defense suffered a bit in these 2 series, playing partially against Toronto and obviously playing in the games against Miami, he took a step back. But for the most part, the Thybulle pick was good. I mean, he still made second team all defense. So you know there's some value there with him as a player, as a teammate on the 76ers roster. Tyrese Maxey, a potential budding star in this league at a young age, and he wants to get better and better and better. So the pros, I'll give mine, of course, but what do you make of the pros of them adding this pick 23 and potentially here on this 22-23 roster?
I mean, you're talking about the pros for the Sixers getting it, right?
Yes.
I think the biggest pro is that, right now, and there are a couple young guys out there who project to be late in the first round, who could help the Sixers, especially a guy, who could come in and do some stuff off the bench. Because when we look at the 76ers bench, I mean, we look and we see how, they're kind of sort of cap strapped, right? They don't have a lot of money. But when you look at their bench, you say to yourself, let me say something, a lot of money, I'm clarifying, a lot of money to go out there and then afford a legitimate rotation perimeter guy, the perimeter defender, right? But if there are certain guys in the draft that you can get them for a cheaper price, I feel like that's a good deal. To me, there's one guy, a guy who played for the G League Elite this year, and I'm going to butcher his name, is Marjon Beauchamp, right? This guy could be a solid option for the 76ers at number 23. So to me, that is a plus, right? Being able to identify young talent. Now, again, we also did talk about Jaden Springer, but I think if you can get a guy like Beauchamp who can add depth to your roster and he's on like a rookie deal, I think that can help you a little bit.
And I've seen him anywhere ranging from the late teens into the 20s. So with his size, Keith, that you talk about and what he's able to do as that athletic wing that we discussed a few episodes ago, where we talked about them just needing some youth and athleticism and being able to have some players that can do multiple things. That's one of them with Marchant, where he was able to be one of these players that goes from high school, instead of going to the college route, they went the G League route, to have an opportunity to go in there, get their feet wet, see what it's like to be in the NBA, learn from some of those vets that are there, helping them and training them to become pros and do those things. I mean, you see Jalen Green able to do it last year. And obviously Jalen Green was the top 5 pick, so he's a little bit different. But I just mean the path of doing so. So he understands now, having the G League Ignite, playing in those G League tournaments, Keith, that they had midseason, those types of things, where it helps out. So I agree. That's a pro right there, where you can identify some young talent there, whether it's the 19-year-old, 18, 19-year-old, or maybe how it is lately in the drafts too, Keith, where some of these players that are juniors and seniors who can play basketball, right? They get punished because they stay in school, because it's all about that development. Also all about finding that one young player who can come right in. You want to find that guy who's going to develop and turn into the star, and they're young, where these seniors and juniors, they fall through the cracks, not fall through the cracks, but they drop down, and they drop down to where they do still have value later on in the first round, and maybe you can find somebody there. But a player like Marchant, and the ability that he has, and being that athletic type of wing player that we discussed and the Sixers desperately need, that's a good one. That really is a good one that I would also like to keep my eye on in the event that he does fall to that number 23 spot. It's going to be tough, because once they go through these individual workouts, man, and start showing some of that, again, these GMs and scouts and coaches, they're going to be drooling over the possibilities of a young player like him, and maybe take him a little bit higher than was projected. But next, we'll get into what we see as the cons of the Sixers adding this 23 overall pick, or not adding that 23 overall pick from the Brooklyn Nets, if it is deferred or not. We'll get into that next, right here on Locked On 76ers. But first, I have to tell you about Rock Auto, our presenting sponsor of this episode, but also because I want to tell you about my experience of saving time and money when using Rock Auto. Recently, I had an issue with just something simple, right? Something simple, which was a headlamp. And I wanted to make sure I got that done, took care of that business, so I would not get pulled over for having one headlamp while I'm driving at night. And hey, I chose to spend 30, 50, even maybe 100% less than some of the other parts from chain stores or car dealerships, because I went to Rock Auto, which is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years like myself. And the prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need, from brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. I took advantage of that. I didn't tell you guys about that one. And obviously the headlamp or tail lamps as well. So that was my experience. It has done me well. It's still working. I can turn the car on and not have to worry about somebody telling me or flashing their high beams at me, coming the other way, telling me that, hey, maybe one light is out. So I did that by going to Rock Auto, and you should too. For any of your auto part needs, go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And right, locked on in there, where there's that "how did you hear about us" box, so they know that we sent you. Hey, folks, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Welcome back to Locked On 76ers. Keith Pompey and Devon Givens here with you, discussing the 76ers and their possible draft pick. We'll know by tomorrow, folks. We'll know if they have a draft pick in the 2022 NBA draft. Keith, the cons. If we look at this team right now, luxury tax where they are. Now, look, it won't hurt them much, but there are potentially some cons there for the Sixers if they do, in fact, get this 23 overall pick from the Brooklyn Nets, if they defer it back. So when you look at it from that perspective, what are some of the cons potentially for the Sixers in this deal?
I mean, I think the biggest con for the 76ers is, let's just assume that, James Harden opts in, right? Opts in, and, he's going to opt in and take that, opt in for that $47.4 million. It's actually 47.3, but it's close to $4 million salary. Yeah. Well, basically, they have $2.5 million at money to work with on the salary cap, right? You know what I mean? Where in regards to going after somebody. Now, the thing is that the tough part about this is, like, when you look at it and you say to yourself, like what the 76ers are doing, like, let's say because the number 23 pick will carry a $2.5 million cap hold. Okay. And if James either picks up his 47.7 or player option or isn't willing to take a discount, right, the Sixers will have more than $140 million tied up in 12 players, right? Now, that's not even counting Danny Green's $10 million salary. So the thing is, the more money that the Sixers can save in regards to go out and bringing in a free agent, is the better for them. You know what I mean? Now, I still think they'll probably have a tough time unless they use like that mid-level exception. Yeah. They have it's 10.3 non-tax player mid-level exception that they have, or they have a 4.1 million biannual exception. Right. So those are the things that they're going to have to use to be able to bring in a quality player. But when you add that extra 2.5, then you're having some flexibility, because, see, when you think about it, instead of using that 2.5, they can get a guy, a veteran minimum contract could carry around a $1.8 million cap hold. That would give the Sixers $700,000 in cap flexibility. So you understand what I'm saying? It's by doing it next year, they're basically saving money.
Okay, and when you bring up the Danny Green part, the Sixers, for the people who don't know, Danny Green had signed a 2-year deal last offseason, $10 million annually, so 20 over the 2 years. But the second year was a team option. And now, with this injury that he sustained with the ACL and the LCL in that final game of the playoffs, the Sixers have a decision to make, but they have a decision to make by the end of June. So they have enough time to figure out, based on when his surgery is done. I don't know if it's done or not. I haven't really checked. If it's tech. So whenever that is, they have until the end of June to make a decision if they want to pick up that $10 million option. I don't really know if they're able to, number one, if they decide to do it, will they do some work, Keith, ahead of time with the league office and finding out if they can get an injury exception for the season because of his injury, which will keep him off the floor, even though he's talking about he think he's going to be back by All-Star break. Little optimistic. Again, people, new to our show here, I tore my ACL in 2019. And while I may not have a round-the-clock work like Danny Green will with the best doctors, that's not an easy thing to come back from so quickly. Look at Jamal Murray, right? Look at Jamal Murray. He's been out for a year and a half. So I think it's pretty optimistic for Danny Green to be thinking that way. That being said, Keith, I think it's in the Sixers' best interest to not pick up Danny Green's $10 million option to have that carried on there with an extra roster spot and the money that you're talking about.
True. The only thing is the one thing I'll say about that is the deal is if you know you're going to be over the tax, and if there's a team that you can make a trade for, like a struggling team that wants to eat salary just to get it, I can see you picking it up, but then trading them.
But don't you have to know that ahead of time?
You're going to have to know. Yeah, this is right now. Yeah, this is vital. Now, here's something else that I will say.
Sure.
That with as far as trading a pick. Now, I believe the Sixers can trade a first-round pick, the thing in consecutive years, but they would have to draft that player first. So, in other words, they would possibly draft that player for another team and then trade them. But you just can't trade it. You know what I mean? Just to trade it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So they trade it before the draft. You have to wait until after the draft is done, select a player, and then send them to said team that you had the agreement with. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yep. So folks, trying to break it down as best as we can. We'll know by tomorrow what happens. Of course, from the Brooklyn Nets, well, they're deferred. Maybe they'll let us all know by the end of today, but we'll have a better understanding of where the Brooklyn Nets are in their decision-making on what to do with that draft selection and for the 76ers as well. We got to thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. And tomorrow we'll get into a little bit of some future stuff with the Sixers in terms of the big fella and where he is right now with this organization. Everything seems fine. Everything seems stable, but you can't help but think a little forward ahead and wonder what his mindset is if things don't start to turn out much better, a little bit faster with them advancing in the Eastern Conference. Now, make your second listen Locked On NBA for Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Keith.
Hey, man. Thank you. I want to thank you. I want to thank y'all for listening, but I want y'all to do something. I want you guys to do yourself a favor and give both of us a follow on Twitter. You see, follow my man D at Divine G975, and you can follow me at Pompey on Sixers. But also, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel wherever you get your YouTube at, wherever you subscribe to. What I'm talking about? I messed up, D. I'm trying to do two
That's
things.
Okay.
What I meant to say is you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts at, but you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel by going to YouTube, logging on Locked On 76, and clicking on the Liberty Bell, and that way you can specifically get this YouTube channel. So I was trying to blend them both in. I'm like, oh, that's not right.
I got it, but I'm glad you cleaned it up for the people so they can get it too, man. Listen, thanks as always. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow, and hopefully we're having that answer that we're looking for. Brooklyn and Philadelphia, what happens with that number 23rd overall pick. Keith, have a good rest of your day. You folks out there, have a great rest of your day. Stay cool, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you.